Good morning. Today is March 19th, 2026, and welcome to another session of the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project. Thank you all for joining us here today. As many of you know, the Will Work for Food project was founded in 2020 by Natalie Armstrong Matan during the pandemic as a way to bring folks together to engage in community and learning, while also trying to do some good out there by supporting food banks worldwide, which are always under so much pressure and stress. That program has continued now for 6 weeks, and every week our team, Natalie Armstrong Matan, Jeff Kitchhaven, and Jean Lawler, along with myself, David Schraga, bring you a new speaker to share their expertise with our audience of mediators, lawyers, and many others who sit at the intersection of negotiations, business, and human behavioral psychology as well. As you know, there is no charge for these amazing programs, and our fantastic speakers and team all volunteer their time to bring these programs to you. Instead, we ask that if you like what you see and you are so inclined and able, we invite you to make a donation to a local food bank to support our fight against hunger. And please let us know, of course, and then we try and keep track of them, which leads me to one of our favorite parts of the program every week, which is where we share the running tally of donations that we have been told about by our very generous audiences. And so, Jean Lawler, will you please do the honors and let us know where we sit today?
Hi, well, we sit in a great space, David. So far, we have been told about, and that's the key, told about. I'm sure there's more, but we've been told about $944,316.54 in donations to food banks around the world, thanks to our generous audience and speakers. And so that's wonderful. And one little note here, I would be remiss given that today is March 19th. Well, I'm here in California, and as every school child used to learn at some point, I suppose, March 19th is the day the Swallows return to San Juan Capistrano. And so there's a little bit of California trivia for you. They fell off for a while, but now they're back full bore. I'm told we shall see if they come back today, kind of like Groundhog Day. Capistrano Swallows Day. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Jean, for sharing that, for sharing with our audience a little bit of the local flavor here in Southern California. The Swallows, everyone knows, is beautiful and lovely San Juan Capistrano. Well, folks, we have a fantastic program today. I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to be discussing, and then tell you some more about our fantastic panel of speakers. Today's program is entitled A Survival Guide to Investing in Hollywood. It's a topic that's very near and dear to my heart in particular. And this seminar provides you with a truly insider's perspective on the world of Hollywood accounting and finance, and explores where film and TV deals most often unravel, why disputes arise, and how they are resolved in practice by the experts who deal with them on a day-to-day basis. Our presenters will also provide you with insight into how front-end negotiations across talent, investor, and distributor deals affect the back-end payments for all the parties who are embracing these new deal structures in an evolving and rapidly changing environment here. This program brings together three leaders whose work sits at the intersection of entertainment, finance, accounting, and dispute resolution, and we're really privileged to have them here with us today. I'll embarrass them for a moment with their extraordinary credentials. Viviana Zarragoitia is a senior vice president at TPC. They're a boutique firm specializing in senior lending for film and television. She's been involved in more than 200 independent films and has received over 80 executive producer credits, which in Hollywood we know is a really big deal. She's worked at Lionsgate, overseen multi-million-dollar distribution deals and managed royalty audits. She's also an active member of the Producers Guild of America and serves on the board of female executives in media and entertainment. Peter Klass is a partner at GHJ and leads the firm's industry-leading profit participation services practice group. With more than 25 years of experience himself in entertainment accounting and audits, he specializes in participations, contract compliance, litigation support, and dispute resolution, working hand in hand with lawyers on a nearly daily basis, I'm sure. Before joining his firm, he worked at Sony Pictures, managing participations and supervising worldwide third-party audits. He is an author as well and the co-author of Movie Money, Understanding Hollywood's Creative Accounting Practices, and he's been a recipient of the LA Times Entertainment Business Visionary Awards. And last but certainly not least, we have William Nix. He's the founder and CEO of Creative Projects Groups and a producer himself, working across entertainment, media, sports, and intellectual property. He is a lifetime voting member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. I imagine he's got some Oscar attendance experiences under his belt as well, and a member of the Television and Recording Academies. His work spans feature films, documentaries, and multi-platform media projects that we're seeing more and more these days, obviously. He's also an adjunct professor at Pepperdine's Strauss Institute, our fantastic law school up here in Malibu, California, where he teaches entertainment and media dispute resolution. And he has long been engaged in projects that connect storytelling, finance, and global impact. So combined, this panel really has tremendous expertise. And as I mentioned, it's a real privilege to have them here today. Peter, welcome. The charity you all have designated for us today is Grassroots Neighbor in Playa del Rey. I wanted to invite you to tell us a little bit about it, and I understand that maybe Viviana will do those honors, given her more personal connection to the organization. And then on with the presentation. The floor is yours, and thank you again for being here.
Thank you, David.
Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Peter, for inviting me to be part of this. A quick note on Grassroots Neighbor. It began in 2020 during the pandemic here in Playa del Rey, which is where I live. It is dedicated to offering food assistance to those impacted and in need. It takes in donations of food and also monetary donations to then disperse to the West Side area. They also partner with a group on Sundays called Feed the People that provides warm meals to those in the unhoused population. I myself worked as a volunteer during the pandemic when I worked from home to help put groceries together during my lunch hour, actually, during the week, which was then delivered by other volunteers. So it's a great organization that has actually grown since then. They have a storefront here in Playa del Rey, and I'm happy to share more information with David so you can share it with the wider group after the fact.
Excellent. Thank you.
Wonderful. All right, everybody. Good morning, and I'm very happy to kick this off with my cohorts, Viviana and William. And today we have a mixtape for you of various trending topics in Hollywood from a profit participations perspective, film financing, deal structuring, and even AI. These are all trending topics, and we want to make this conversational. We're going to have a dialogue about it. So you don't need to wait till the very end to ask a question. You can put a question in a chat. We'll do pauses after sections in case you have questions or comments. David will help facilitate. And onwards we go. So as you can see, this is the mixtape. Some of these are Will's slides, and it's talking about AI and other industry developments. But to kick us off, I wanted to give everybody a little bit of a background on profit participation. This is the mysterious world of contingent compensation and Hollywood accounting. And what it means is that it's contractually negotiated profit sharing arrangements. This does not follow accounting GAAP. It's purely governed by the agreement and the studio and does not necessarily need to even follow customs and practices in the industry. Who gets these? It's talent, actors, directors, writers, producers, financiers, IP holders. Sometimes it's aggregators and investors in profit participation streams, of course, co-producing partners and agencies. And we have two types of models. The traditional model, which is bonuses, which includes box office bonuses, other contingent compensations where there's a certain cut-in point. There are gross participations where a big-time actor or a producer participate on the picture's revenues. But I want to say that these are defined revenues by whatever's in the agreement. It has nothing to do with traditional financing or accounting models. And of course, there are net proceeds where it's all the revenues, it's on top of all the costs, including distribution, fees, which we'll get into, and all of the production costs. Some of the non-traditional models that we'll briefly touch upon is the cost plus model given by the various streaming services. Think of Netflix, HBO, Apple Plus. These are not the traditional profit participations that are really fairly speculative. I would say most films do not ever reach contingent compensation. That's probably reserved for 5 to 10% of the most successful films. But these cost plus models, rather than hitting, let me give you a baseball analogy. Rather than hitting a home run for a very successful series like a Friends or a Game of Thrones, these types of deals basically guarantee some sort of a return, more like getting on base, and it's simply an imputed formula from the film's budget. And why this matters? Contingent compensation is the biggest liability on all of the studio's books. These profit participation streams can go forever. I have advocated for the kids, the grandkids of profit participants, for the estates, and these profit participation streams can be passed on forever, especially for the evergreen titles. Quick introduction to new media, not to dwell on this, but this is the biggest revenue stream outside of theatrical. It's all about streaming everywhere. We have transactional, we have subscription, we have downloads. This has essentially replaced television as well as the DVDs, physical media, those of you who remember that. And this is the typical film release window. And this really impacts what Viviana, myself, and Will do, because these windows were very much segmented traditionally. It went to theatrical, then it went to home video, which was physical media at that time. Then there was a pay one window, then there was a free window, and on and on and on. These days, these windows are very much compressed. Theatrical is 2 to 6 weeks exclusive. Then it goes into premium video on demand, where customers can download the film. Then it goes into streaming or pay one windows, where those windows can stretch for 6 to 12 months, or really can go on forever. These windows are much more movable these days, and it's really very much dependent on what's negotiated in the agreement. Are there theatrical commitments, or are the business decisions related to streaming only?
I wouldn't mind Peter quickly touching on that, because I think from a financier perspective, a lot of the trends that we are seeing, because I work more on the independent filmmaking space, distributors' change in distribution models has really affected the entire ecosystem of how productions are made these days. Whereas because you don't have theatrical revenue necessarily guaranteed to rely on as a profit center, this has driven distributors to be more conservative in the amount that they pay to acquire and release films, which means that it has conversely driven budgets down, because producers have to be more conservative as to what they are producing a film for and the cost of it, as they are trying to back into what they anticipate they can make off of distribution revenue. So eliminating, in a sense, theatrical, which is sort of a very nebulous release strategy that doesn't always work for every film, has eradicated one other source of revenue stream, in addition to the lack of home entertainment. As Peter mentioned, we no longer have physical media anymore as a viable profit center to rely for distribution revenues on. So really, you have the lack of theatrical, the lack of home entertainment that has eliminated two revenue streams, which is driving what distributors are willing to pay for movies down, conversely drives budgets down. And it's why on our sphere as a boutique lender, we have seen a proliferation of volume of business due to budgets going down to sort of the level that we operating. And this would be sort of sub 10, sub 15 million budgets. In my tenure at TPC, over 14 years, there were budgets that were much higher because you had other revenue streams to rely on. And now, with the collapse of the windows, which reduces the amount of revenues, these budgets are going down.
Yeah. To piggyback on that as well, I tend to look at these things from a historical perspective and see certain patterns and trends in this. Some of what we're seeing right now is really reminding me of the battle over the financial interest and syndication rules. That was both a litigation battle as well as a battle in the Congress, and the sort of the basic part of it was that producers on the front end would go into a deficit in order to produce things where they figured they could. The big upside was in syndication downstream and those other markets. And the battle was between the productions, the studios who weren't in the network business then. It was the battle between the producers and the networks as to who would participate and how heavily the studios could be in the production business. And of course, the syndication market today has been heavily subsumed by the streaming world. So a lot of what you used to see on local television stations and local syndication has now been taken over by the streaming services.
And that's a really good point here. As Viviana mentioned, the industry is stressed due to the various changes in the distribution strategies. This is arising in disputes. And what's driving these disputes is that the profit margins for the studios, the distributors who are really the gatekeepers for all the stakeholders, have been squeezed. And therefore, the waterfalls are either delayed or actually never deliver on time. And it's really the absence of linear television and physical media, as Viviana mentioned. Those were really the revenue drivers because of the high profit margins they delivered to the studios and other distributors, and thereby they could share some of their profits. Now, they've always accounted for in a Hollywood manner in terms of a lot of this is very interpretive, as opposed to traditional accounting or traditional finance, where it's more bright lines oriented, black or white issues. This is all really interpretive. For example, the type of fees that studios can charge. This is all negotiated. Not all of it needs to be related to what is market. I've seen some deals that are where we have to make equity type claims as distributors really create such deal structures where the stakeholders, the producers, are almost guaranteed to be in a loss, no matter how successful the film is. And this is where we're talking about where most of the disputes arise. It's really the related party self-dealing type of transactions or imputed revenues that Will and Viviana were talking about.
Peter, maybe this is a good moment for me to just jump in for a second with a question that came up and just to make a comment. I mean, it's fascinating to hear you all talk about the changes in these revenue streams, from on the business and finance side of it, how it affects budgets and distribution models. I mean, the thing that I think is so interesting about this too is that it's very tangible, right? Because we have all sort of lived through this change in media together. So when Viviana talks about the lack of physical home video, I mean, I think most of us probably remember, used to buy VHS tapes, right? Or rent them from Blockbuster. And then eventually we all had these DVD collections for many years. And we were watching repeats of Friends on network television and syndicated television. And I think your point is that all these distribution models were creating revenue that's kind of gone away, right? So it's that now we're in a new place in terms of what you're dealing with in order to account for these projects and for the studios to make them profitable. And that goes to the question that was asked, and maybe you could expound on this. It's a good time, I think, for your next slide is one of your earlier slides said that contractual agreements and guidelines for participations for profits, they don't follow GAAP accounting. So for those of us who are not familiar with GAAP GAAP accounting means, maybe you could talk about that in the waterfall and how these revenues flow.
Yes, that's right. So That's the big differential when we're talking about finance, even some of the front end versus contingent compensation or profit participations, if you will. This is all purely contractually negotiated. And typically, the studios have all of the power. Revenues are reported when earned, not when earned, but when they are received. So it's the differential between the matching principle. For example, in GAAP accounting, there's a matching principle, whereas in Hollywood accounting, typically the studios will reserve for expenses, sometimes years before they are incurred, and report the cash only when it's received. So the participant is always chasing their profits.
And so big picture. So GAAP accounting, generally accepted accounting principles are like if you're like, how does it work? Like if you're representing a Fortune 500 company and doing a P&L, you follow these established rules versus trying to understand what a contract says about how to calculate profits.
That's right. The word audit is a defined term. What we're doing here, what my firm is doing, is profit participation audits, which is really a term of art. These are consultations because they do not follow any agreed upon procedures or any of those GAAP guidelines. It's purely what has been negotiated between both parties, meaning the producer and the studio or the talent in the studio.
Yep.
I would say also to add to this, our sort of thesis for this presentation is where do disputes arise? And I think one of the largest um, areas where disputes arise is the disconnect between what participants think they have in terms of rights and entitlement and what their contracts actually state. And this comes up certainly in Peter's world. Obviously, he makes a living out of this, but in my world as well, as a financier, our financing is always structured as debt. So we sit ahead of equity and ahead of most profit participants in the waterfall after off the top expenses. A lot of times when it comes to either revenue coming in or when it's time for collection accounts to start paying, there is a clear disconnect between what profit participants think that they have because their equity, because their proportion of investment may be higher than ours, and what they actually have negotiated, and also what even their lawyers think they have in terms of security. And there is a very fundamental misunderstanding sometimes between profit participants' entitlements and what their contract was negotiated up front at the point in time that the film is actually getting produced versus later on when it goes to Peter's side of the cycle and you're trying to understand and audit revenues.
Right. The word intent comes up a lot. That's the big gap
Yeah.
between
To,
intent and
to
reporting.
want to jump in on two things on the screen, one on bundling. So there was a famous case with the Ladd Corporation where there was a bundling of a number of their films and it was basically every film was straight lined in the sense that it was treated as if every film had the same value. And there was a challenge to that in terms of how the royalties got paid out and who was entitled to what and whatever. And they went all the way up on appeal and two different times with that and settled in the end of the day with it. But the idea of how films are put together as packages and bundled and sold out into the marketplace, as well as whether those are arm's length transactions. There have been a number of instances with Fox and Disney, for example, where they have not been found not to have arm's length transactions. And in terms of how the valuation was going, so how the money got paid back to the producers and rights holders, was a big part of where the disputes lay with that. The other one I just wanted to is kind of an interesting historical one, involved Don Johnson and his series Nash Bridges, which ran for about 6 years as a broadcasting and between 1996 and 2001. And a lot of these kinds of issues as to what did the contract say and sort of provisions like tolling rights and the statute of limitations that the contract said you have to come back and renew your extension of tolling the statute of limitations when you're seeking to recover your royalties and whatever. That case basically went to a jury trial, and the initial claim was for $23 million because of interest accruing and whatever, which was a contractual issue. It's being litigated in the case. The jury awarded $50 million. It went up on appeal. The appellate court looked at it, and it said basically, well, we think maybe that was too much. And basically, by 2013, so well after this series was off the air, they finally settled for $19 million in a payout. But that's how this sort of stuff can play out. And this is with a well-financed, heavily represented by top law firm type of client, was able to sort of go and deal with the contractual claims that were involved in that series. Most of the people in the independent world, which Viviana was speaking to, have a much harder time having the resources to fight those battles and make those claims and go the distance that Don Johnson was able to do in his litigation.
And before we move on, as Will was talking about some of the big disputes that made it to the headlines, the most common dispute that's out there in terms of Hollywood accounting and profit participations, the one you don't necessarily hear about because it doesn't raise to the level of value of some of these bundling or self-dealing issues, is really home entertainment royalties.
Mhm.
And those type of disputes may be as low as $50,000 for some participants to a couple $1 million for others.
Mhm.
And what is that? It's traditionally Hollywood since about the early 80s. All of the Hollywood contracts at every studio, the standard definition included home video on a royalty basis, meaning that that's about 20, or for sometimes for A+ talent, maybe an uplift of 30%. A royalty would be paid and reported to the participants. However, with the advent of new media, these are not devices anymore. There's no costs involved. And especially when you take something like SVOD or AVOD, these are streaming deals essentially replacing television. The big dispute is with the transactional entertainment lawyers is that streaming is television, yet the studios are applying that it's home video, the physical home video definitions, and thereby shielding 70 or 80% of the revenues from the participants and from those contractual obligations. That's the most common dispute out there.
It's a great point that you raise also, and I mean I think the big picture I'm hearing from you guys is, the layperson sees a hit movie, right? And it's, the budget was $100 million, but it made $200 million at the box office. And how did that movie not make a profit? Or how does a show like Nash Bridges that runs for 7 years not be purportedly not in profits? And it sounds like what you're saying is, Peter, the answer is look at the contract, right? Because
Look at the contract.
that's really what dictates it, And back to the historical piece, I think the home video thing is fascinating because I mean, the original model was like Betamax, right? And then home videos, and they used to literally physically have rooms full of VCR players where they would be recording and duplicating these tapes, and there was a cost associated with it. But it sounds like you're saying studios are treating that same model or applying that model to the streaming media and saying, well, we're only going to give you 30% of this revenue because we have to spend so much to physically make these copies. But it's
Well,
shit.
yeah,
Yeah.
on that point, just to jump industries in the music industry, I remember there was a challenge to some of the way the contracts were written in that business because they were still charging for certain manufacturing requirements in the streaming era when we'd long moved on into Pandora and those ways of getting music, and yet they would still bake that in as a charge under contracts that they could deduct before paying to the artists. So this is not just Hollywood accounting; it's also music industry accounting, at least historically.
I would also add that as Peter is talking about the fragmentation of the different types of revenue streams between home video, royalties, licensing, there's also, with the proliferation of streamers, a reduction in territories because, as we know, and anyone who has sold a film to a streamer knows, usually they take worldwide rights. So whereas in the go-go days of home video and VHS, you could say, well, I can pre-sell a few territories make the film, keep domestic and split rights and make profit really from unsold territories. Now you really only have one buyer who is taking worldwide, so you don't have the flexibility that you had in the past to sell to international territories for more. And I know Peter can speak to this a little bit more, but it's something that we experienced as well as financiers, and also due to the proliferation of streamers and the cost plus model, that the advent of them taking worldwide rights also eliminates another revenue stream as well.
I just wanted to pause to see if there's any questions.
There was one question in the chat that asked about how this applies to TV studio deals, but I think you've sort of touched on that already, which is, it affects what's perceived as a successful show, but these streaming deals are really changing the way that TV studio economics work.
And so we spoke about disputes. Here is an example of some of the most common type of disputes I'm seeing. It's the contractual non-compliance. Those are the easiest types of disputes to resolve or at least address. And it's what the contract is, the studio following the contract, accounting geography, imputed fees, and so forth. The more interesting ones, and these are the ones that get escalated and make the headlines, is the contractual interpretations. It's the related party valuations, it's the royalty applications, it's the Nash bridges, it's the Bones case. What is the true value of these properties? Oftentimes, one arm of the company, of the studio, is dealing with another arm. Are they selling it at market value? These days, there's less and less market data out there. Every major studio except for Sony owns a streaming service. They are selling to themselves. Now that they're selling to themselves, are they selling for the right market price? Even if the market price is comparable to third parties, are they exploiting the asset? Are the terms in terms of duration, are they similar? So there's all kinds of scenarios that we can go into in terms of what the intent was and what the outcomes are. There are the equity claims, and I think we spoke about those as well, is that sometimes it's just not fair. The studios own all the power, and unless you're a producer with huge leverage, you kind of just have to take what it is, and every studio's definitions, they're essentially the same.
I would add to that under the contractual interpretations part of it, that if you've ever seen one of these studio contracts, and each studio has a different definition of gross and net and all the, what's deductible and not, and whatever. Even for somebody who's a very experienced lawyer, the language that is used to describe how that is supposed to work contractually is charitably described as opaque. They're intentionally vague in many instances to allow things to be interpreted widely in favor of the studio or the streaming services. So it is pretty difficult to kind of wade through those and understand exactly how things work. Like in the Don Johnson case, the thing like tolling the statute of limitations and having to give notice, that was pretty clear, but even that was challenged, and the court took a different position as to whether it was validly applied or not. So all of this stuff is pretty difficult. One of the things that's sort of interesting in terms of what's happening in the industry is Matt Damon and Ben Affleck came out with this artist equity approach with Netflix on deal, and whether that's going to survive and be, that's sort of an old type of structure or not is going to be wait to be seen. But they're trying to cut into the below the line people into these royalties and participations in a way that they have not been able to do. Kind of harkens back to the early days of Mary Pickford and the gang that put together United Artists. But it is sort of interesting to see how people are trying to work with the new system and the new realities of theatrical versus streaming, and where the dividing line is. Most of the big streaming services they call them different things. They have streaming bonuses. The Disney has a standard production provisions, or SPDE appendix. Netflix has bonus provisions. They, trying to address some of these things and give a little bit more standardization to it. But we're still in an era where the data is sort of held in a black box. Netflix will report online, what got the most hours of viewing or whatever, but those aren't the deal terms so much as sort of viewership and audience evaluation.
And Viviana, are you seeing that, to Will's point, are you seeing transparency issues in independent film?
Mhm.
Yes. I think for streaming, certainly that's still a very difficult black box for, and again, sort of you relate to that earlier, is the equity player in independent film has the least amount of leverage. So they are beholden to the distributors, and there aren't other means for them to access this data. And it's really why in the past couple of years I have seen a proliferation of more independent self-streaming opportunities or self-distribution type models. I mean, there is, for instance, the Fathom events, right? Where a lot of distributors have decided that, a lot of content makers, I should say, have decided to forego a theatrical via a traditional distributor and four wall and do their own theatrical release for either a week or X amount of days to qualify for output deals or other types of ancillary revenue because they can't necessarily trust the way that a distributor may release a film theatrically or the amount of P&A money that would be put behind it in order to generate interest and people to the theaters. So there is now an ecosystem that has come about of companies that are looking to acquire titles to self-distribute with more transparency, not only for streaming, but also there are boutique distributors that are trying to do this for theatrical as well.
Peter, can I ask a question also? Because I think that last slide was great in terms of examples of disputes. Oh, I see you've get into the audit process. I was just going to say, for the folks in our audience who may not be as familiar with the life cycle, I mean, you're an auditor. You work hand in hand with lawyers, obviously, but these disputes sort of have a life of their own before they ever reach you. I thought it might be useful to sort of explain sort of what happens before it gets into your hands, and then how the process goes.
So I would say the best practice in terms of a life cycle, and it's rarely followed, is even when the deal is in its inception and it's in negotiations between the distributor and talent, is to work hand in hand with an expert such as myself or Viviana or Will to provide guidance in terms of contractual definitions. And that really depends on the scale. Viviana deals more with independent films. I deal more with studio type of distribution deals. Even though some attorneys are incredibly sophisticated when it comes to negotiations, the front end, and all of the deal structures, what's missed is what are the outcomes based on one word, two words, the type of definitions. What is, do we negotiate direct or indirect cost? Do we say actual cost reported? A huge dispute, and I'm sure Viviana knows all about this, is when it comes to production costs. What is actual production cost? Distributors often say, well, it's whatever the budget was. Or is it net of the production tax incentives? What was actually spent? That's a huge gap, and that can mean a film that's really a financial failure, or one that is eventually paying profits because those production incentive tax credits and incentives can be 20 to 30% of a film's budget, sometimes even 40 and 50%.
And to Peter's point, as a third party financier of tax incentives are never included in a definition of receipts because that's essentially our collateral for our loan. So when we are involved as a financier of incentives, the incentives always sit outside of any waterfalls and any definition of revenue. So a profit participant that does not know that or is not aware of that will come to a rude awakening when it hits Peter's desk.
Right. And usually that's too late. And going back to David's point is a litigator often comes in too late when there's already a dispute, when reporting uh, has has really departed from the intent. of the understanding of the participant, the stakeholder, the transaction attorney. And there's a huge gap. And a litigator comes in and works with me after the audit or during the audit to flush out these disputes. But in some ways, it's too late. There are contractual issues that we can bring forth and usually prevail on those. But then there are also equity type issues. And unless it really goes to court, those types of equity issues in arbitration and mediation, they're really forgotten and brushed off to the side.
So, Peter, I have a question for you. Do lawyers ever come to you on the front end when negotiating these terms and ask for your advice and counsel on crafting these provisions?
I would say about 10% of the time, and oftentimes it is actually with independent films or when there's an IP type deal. And oftentimes it's attorneys that are that are international. They're really not familiar with the Hollywood accounting and film and television, and they're looking for some guidance. They're shrewd negotiators, but they may not know the terms of art, and how they will really result in reporting by the studios.
That actually raises an interesting question, which is you operate all over the world, and the receipts and how they're calculated are at source in many or most instances. It'd be interesting, to David's point about how the audit process works as to how you deal with the international side, because of course, film and TV have for decades, almost since the inception, been global businesses.
That's right. It is a global business, but there are really two types of main approaches to this. One of them is you have a global studio. Think of Warner Brothers, think of Universal, where they have their branches in the major territories, and then they have sub-licensing deals with local sub-distributors. The other approach is what Viviana mentioned, is that there's a domestic distributor, and the deal is struck with a domestic distributor, and the rest are all pre-sales, and a sales agent comes in. And Viv, maybe you want to talk about that a little bit, because that really departs from the major studio type model.
Yeah, so for independent filmmaking, oftentimes, if the level of cast warrants a pre-sale, so this would be A-list cast that everyone in this audience would know, a shrewd producer will go out and will engage a sales agent to enter into international pre-sales on that film. So these are sales made with international buyers in different countries, just based purely on the strength of the material and the package, so the script and the cast. And so a producer will then come to a third party lender such as us to give them a loan on the aggregate of those pre-sales towards the budget of the film. The sales agent enters into those deals. We finance them. It goes towards their budget. It reduces the amount of equity that a producer then has to go raise, because they have diversified the finance plan with pre-sales, usually some tax credits, and then the rest is equity, and that equity will sit to recoup against unsold territories, be they international or domestic. So this is a key driver of independent filmmaking and financing. But what it does lead to, I think, is oftentimes, because you are getting what is called an MG, a minimum guarantee deal, from the international territories, it does, for all rights usually, it does restrict the amount of compensation after the fact. You're relying on royalties from international that may be difficult in the current stream of business that we are in today, as not all the international buyers may release the films theatrically, or it may be difficult to find other revenue streams from the foreign markets, which I'm sure is something Peter is used to auditing international as well. But it's sort of, you're, as a financier and as a producer, you are giving up potential upside down the line to just make the film in the first place. So that's your cost benefit analysis. And these days, the pre-sale market is not as viable as it used to be for a lot of the factors that we've already discussed today. But it's becoming ever increasingly hard to rely on pre-sales, especially as distributors become more conservative, and in light of global events recent, it's really affecting the viability and payment of the international distributors.
Mm.
Yeah. And I just want to give you a quick overview of the life cycle of how a dispute arises and the settlement process. And this is just one example, probably takes the most common example. 50% of cases that come across my desk is that something that I've not seen the deal ahead of time. It's usually I will see reporting after a series or a film has been released. And a transaction attorney has negotiated certain types of definitions and writers and gets for the participant. And after they receive a few of the accounting statements, they come to us. They flag that there are certain type of accounting, let's say imputed fees. Those are most often associated with television, where it's not following the intent. We then discuss evaluate the potential for the audit with the attorney, what the potential upside is, because when we're advising attorneys and their business managers, if you will, is we don't want people to spend good money chasing bad. If your film is $150 million unrecouped or $100 million unrecouped, an audit usually doesn't make sense unless it's for informational purposes or it's really to gain information and get a better deal going forward. But what we're trying to do is get our clients the revenues due that should have been paid had the studio been following the intended deal structure. On a participation audit may take as long as 5 years. I hate to say it, but at the big studios, when an intent of notice is submitted to a distributor, and typically those need to be submitted within 24 or 36 months, or contractually they lose those rights. It sits in a queue, and those queues can be 1 to 5 years, depending on the studio. Once we get in, we're looking back at the historical information, and an audit typically takes, for large series, typically takes a year. So you could be 3, 4, 5 years in, and we then generate an exceptions report. Will mentioned how we are auditing worldwide. We're not doing a gap type of audit. We're not providing assurance. That would just not be practical. Rather, we are hitting the biggest risk areas and where this dispute is most likely visible. Then once a report is issued and submitted to the studio, it enters the settlement phase. And typically an attorney or a litigator, along with an expert such as myself, will help settle the dispute. And settling the dispute can take one meeting with a studio, depending on the leverage of the participant, or it could take 6, 7 rounds, and that's even before it's ever escalated. So it can take a month, or it could take several years to resolve. I wanted to talk about some of those big big litigation matters that made it to the headlines. And we have a couple here. Will also has been involved and knows quite a bit about some of the ones, including AI. And when we were preparing for this, I was discussing with David that all of these are dated. They're really historical. There isn't as many disputes as there used to be. And that's simply because pretty much every contract in the industry has an arbitration clause. There's a lot less litigation out there. Litigation is also expensive, and it's most often resolved. Less than 1% of disputes these days are escalated to litigation, or even less than 2% into arbitration.
Yeah, I'll just jump in. It's a really interesting dynamic that we were talking about because
Mm.
it reflects a few different things I think that are going on. I mean, it used to be that a lot of these cases were taken on by some of these fantastic entertainment litigation boutiques, and they would do them on a contingency basis. And to what Viviana and Bill had been speaking about, the revenue streams potentially from syndication and from these other licensing models, they could pay for years and years going forward, right? And if you get in front of a jury and they don't like what the studio's done, and you potentially have some claims that are for something other than just the contract damages, you really could hit a home run. And
And actually, because of that and some adverse decisions for the studios and networks, their longstanding policy against opposing ADR, alternative dispute resolution and arbitration for resolution, they flipped and went the other direction. And they wanted them to be private, and they wanted to have more control and not be in front of a jury, and specifically have built in waiving jury rights into the transactional part of the agreements.
that's a great point, because a lot of these law firms would try and find a way to, for example, file the lawsuit in Santa Monica because there was
Yep.
a community there that knew the entertainment community and they were going to be more friendly. And to William's point, that's really shifted, because now if you have to go into arbitration, you've got to pay for the arbitration costs, you've got to pay for the arbitrator's fees.
Hmm.
Um, and a lot of these plaintiffs lawyers and studio lawyers, they don't, or the clients themselves, it really creates a financial disincentive in some ways to move forward. And then, of course, there's the privacy aspect of it and not having the jury present. And it's just there's a perception that big arbitrations generally tend to favor big corporations that have help pick the arbitrators and are sort of repeat players in the business. And there's a real tension there, because obviously arbitrators duty to the process and to the clients, and they're impartial and neutral. But the person who maybe is just a director who's suing over one film has to come into this process they're not as familiar with, and they don't have the benefits of being in front of a jury that loves their work. So
And one of the few ways you can overturn an arbitration result is indeed if there's uh, that sort of the repeat business that takes away the fiduciary duty that an arbitrator is subject to because they want to get the next case and not be disqualified because they have made an adverse decision to one of the studios. And it's a fairly, like with the JAMS, the Judicial Arbitration and Mediation Services, they have a fairly small pool of people who are part of the JAMS qualified arbitrators. And so if they want to keep working in that area as a source of income, there is a problem with keeping that objectivity and neutrality that they're obligated to have.
And,
yeah,
and another quick point, sorry about
I,
that. Go
I was just going to disclose, I'm a AAA arbitrator, so I'm conscious of these things. And, there's very robust disclosure policies, right? And there's, everyone takes their obligations very, very seriously, of course. But there is that perception, of course.
Mhm.
And
Somebody, somebody's always unhappy at the end of an arbitration. That's
Absolutely, absolutely.
right. So it cuts both ways, and you just do your best.
Peter, I wanted to do a time check-in to make sure that we're not going to run over.
No, that's why I wanted to do a bite-sized. I want us to each share something, whether it's you, myself, Viviana, a dispute that we were recently either involved in or are aware of. And one of the quick points I wanted to add is that there's fewer and fewer opportunities to even be an expert, or um, how to really advocate in an arbitration, because the NDAs that all of the studios have you sign, they're so restrictive, and everybody's restricted by an NDA. And now that there's less market data out there, essentially you are very limited in what you can put in a report or even share with your client on that. So you have to be very creative in terms of navigating these disputes and advising your client and advocating for him because of the strict NDA.
I don't mind sharing a dispute just to kick it off of something that we see in the independent space a lot, and we haven't touched on yet, is the Section 181 tax code for equity investors, where they can essentially write off their investment in a film. So in the past couple of years, this 181 code has led to a proliferation of equity investors in the independent film financing space. And there are a lot of films that we have come across that now include equity investment as 181. And there are a lot of films that would not have been made without it in the past couple of years. Currently, it has not been renewed yet for 2026. We don't know if it will or not, but it's certainly created a bit of unease in terms of projects moving forward right now because of its uncertainty. However, the impetus and the wrinkle of 181 investment is that the investor who is putting in money, the company through which that investment is made, needs to own the copyright to the film. Now, what this creates is an inherent conflict between the IP creator and the investor, which, as we know, is oftentimes the seed of where a lot of these disputes arise. So essentially, as a content creator, in order to entice 181 and to bring them on board, the 181 investor has to own the copyright. Now, this has led to issues later on when it comes to distribution. When you are delivering a film to a distributor, the distributor has to be very clear that there is a clear chain of title. So it's understanding the corporate structure that needs to be set up, which entity owns the IP that is then going to sell it to a distributor. We have seen issues arise in discrepancies between different entities and which one owns the copyright, but also on the front end in the negotiation of the creator having to give up the rights, so to speak, to the 181 creates an inherent conflict as well, because now the equity investor has more of the leverage to later on make decisions about distribution that may not necessarily favor the creative interest. Let's say, for instance, a theatrical release is expensive. An equity investor may say, let's forego a theatrical release and go straight to streaming because there is more upside for my investment to be recouped, which may go in conflict as to what a creator wants. So there is conflict in the front end between the creative and the financial, but also later on, a lot of disputes have arisen between lawyers not understanding how to properly document the corporate structure for distribution later on.
And thank you, Viviana. And Will, did you want to talk about Bones as we're wrapping up? You're very familiar with this case, or one of the other AI cases?
Actually, this is a good one, because when the litigation really dug into this, it turned out that when they did the deal to syndicate the Bones series, that the same Fox executive signed both the licensing deal as well as the licensing the receipt of the deal. In other words, the same signature on the same agreement. And the question was whether that was an arm's length transaction. And the court ruled, basically absolutely not. There's been a lot of this. I mentioned Disney before with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and in terms of within different large media corporations, the assigning of rights or the licensing of rights as to whether that you're getting a fair marketplace deal for the what's being licensed in that, and how that's conducted, particularly. It can be something that requires a lot of scrutiny when you're doing it inside a particular company, and it's not a sort of a competitive bidding situation where the contractual obligations to get the best possible deal aren't being met.
And David,
Fantastic. Peter, I think we're at the top of the hour. I think Bill leaves us on it's a great point Bill has left us on, people sort of representing the two different parties within the same ecosystem. But I think sort of the takeaway is it's a fascinating area. I think the business has been changing. You guys are such a tremendous resource to the community and to your clients, and your expertise is really invaluable. I think we could talk about what's happening in studio finance and the distribution models changing, and these audits and these great cases for for a lot longer, but I think we need to conclude that program for today. So I just
But,
want to
yeah,
say,
before you do that, because I didn't get a chance to get to my slides, Peter's and my slides will be shared. I was going to get into the sort of role that AI is beginning to play in terms of not only the creative side and the technical side, but also in terms of revenue sources and intellectual property protection. So there will be some material about that that we weren't able to get to.
okay, great. Well, so anyone I think can reach out to us, and we're happy to share the slides, it sounds like. And this program has been recorded, so it will be available. And with that, I think we will thank everyone for their participation today. Thank you as well for supporting the program and attending. And with that, we are concluded. Thanks so much, everyone. That was
Thank you
fantastic.
for having us.
Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.